Welcome back, everybody. This week in American literature, we tackle the topic of freedom and slavery. Now, a lot of folks will say, well, hey, Mr. K, this should be, put into history class that really does not have a role in American lit. And I disagree. And the basis for this disagreement here, a quote from Nelson Mandela: "A good head and good heart are always a formidable combination. But when you add to that a literate tongue or pen, then you have something very special." And with our readings this week, we have indeed representatives from not only the pen, but also the tongue. We have some selected readings as well as oratory speeches, including what we're going to focus in on this brief lecture, which is Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. Now, a lot of folks who say that the Civil War was not caused by slavery are not history teachers. Before the Revolutionary War, slavery was a dividing topic in America. The Founding Fathers knew that eventually they were going to have to address this, but before they could tackle the topic of slavery, they first had to get out the British, and then they just kind of went through a series of postponing the inevitable about dealing with slavery. And Thomas Jefferson, who penned the Declaration of Independence, was a slave owner. He said slavery is like holding a wolf by the ears. Slavery is like holding a wolf by the ears. So in other words, you cannot hold a wolf by the ears. If it turns its head just a little bit, you can't, it'll turn free. And you can't let it go, because then you'll get bitten, right? So the Founding Fathers knew that they had painted themselves into a corner, and then eventually it just came to be. So how did this come to be? So what began to happen, just like today in America, political power is based upon economic power. So in the American South, economic power was held by a very small percentage of the population, the rich plantation owners who owned slaves. So they were the voice in national and state legislative bodies. And as America starts to go through its history, up north there were moral objections that were being raised against slavery, as well as economic objections. And the economic objections were that there's really no way to compete against free labor. There's just no way that can happen. So gradually more and more people start to become angrier and angrier about slavery. Then in 1820, there was the Missouri Compromise. Missouri was led into the Union as a slave state, but in order to keep the balance in Washington, D.C., with the legislative bodies of the House and the Senate, Maine was admitted as a free state. So that puts into motion the balance between free and slave, right? Free states, slave states had to be in balance. So if someone says that that slavery is not the cause of the Civil War, it's the cause of the Civil War. There were compromises being made to balance out the power between free states and slave states, and everybody knew that sooner or later that the wave was going to crest, and America was going to have to tackle this issue of slavery when the Founding Fathers said that we're all created equal. So how can this be? Well, in Kentucky, which was a slave state, there was a man who gave a go at farming, but he had a really tough time making his farm a success when he was paying his laborers a wage, when all the other neighboring farmers had slaves. So he lost his all his money, and then he had to move up north, and that was Abraham Lincoln's father. Abraham Lincoln, when he was growing up, he grew up in a log cabin, had less than 1 year of schooling. This is just an idea of what it was like for a lot of these poor people, north as well as south. It was grinding poverty. Abraham Lincoln, self-educated, and he was known for being anti-slavery. He was known for it, both north and south. Then in the 1860 election, right, 1860 election, the Civil War, people, it's starting to boil, it's starting to bubble. Abraham Lincoln was the Republican nominee for president. Not too many people know that Abraham Lincoln was left off the ballot in many southern states. Yes, that's mind-boggling. In many southern states, they did not even put his name on the ballot. So in other words, with the 1860 election, that election is north against south, right? So then the northern states, right, vote Abraham Lincoln in, and at that point, it's game on. It's pretty much a done deal, and then it's north against south, and then the Civil War breaks out. Now, one of the climactic battles of the Civil War, we're kind of fast-forwarding through American history class, was Gettysburg. Gettysburg, that's when the Southern armies invaded the North, and up in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, there was a climactic battle, lasted 3 days, and over 50,000 casualties from the North and the South. Now, after the Battle of Gettysburg, of course, the South retreated back into Virginia, and then the Union Army up north, right, they had to pursue the Confederate Army. So the small town of Gettysburg had about 2,500 population, right? 2,500. Over 50,000 casualties, in addition to all the different horses that were dead. So, they didn't know what to do, or they were overwhelmed with caring for the wounded, returning their homes and businesses to order, going back to work, going back to life. So literally, the dead were left to rot on the battlefields, and the stench was terrible. So the governor of Pennsylvania petitioned Washington, got Abraham Lincoln to set up a national cemetery there in Gettysburg. And that is the reason for the Gettysburg Address. Abraham Lincoln was a late invitee. Initially didn't want to invite him. He was like the second on the speaking list, which is really funny. And then he gives us what we call today the Gettysburg Address. And that's it, guys. 267 words. It's not even as long as a 300-word essay. So why are we studying this in American literature? Right? What is it? This is the combination of a literate tongue and pen. This is the combination. So in the next lecture, we'll start to dive in and talk about in greater detail the Gettysburg Address.